The first note floated through the empty auditorium just after sunrise, trembling in the vast silence like a voice that had been waiting years to be heard. Then another note followed, softer and uncertain, played by the small hand of a blind boy who had been told by doctors, teachers, and even frightened relatives that the world would always remain beyond his reach. Sitting beside him on the dusty piano bench was a janitor in a faded gray uniform, guiding the child's fingers with the patience of a father, unaware that behind the half-closed door stood the most powerful woman in the building, covering her mouth as tears streamed down her face. Before we continue, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel Eco-verse if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet miracles that happen when someone chooses to care. The janitor's name was Tavian Brooks, a 38-year-old single father who arrived at the glass tower of Ardenvale Industries every morning before most of the city had finished breakfast. By 7 o'clock, sunlight would spill between the skyscrapers and turn the polished lobby floor into a sheet of gold, but Tavian was usually too busy emptying bins, cleaning fingerprints from elevator doors, and checking the supply closets to notice. He worked 6 days a week and accepted every extra shift offered to him because his 10-year-old daughter, Nessa, depended on him. Her mother had died 5 years earlier after a sudden illness, leaving Tavian with grief he never discussed, unpaid hospital bills, and a child who still sometimes woke in the night asking why good people had to disappear. Tavian had once lived a very different life. Before his wife became sick, he had taught music at a small community school and played piano at weekend events. Music had been the first language he ever understood. His grandmother had shown him how to find middle C when he was only 4, and by 12, he could hear a melody once and repeat it without sheet music. He had dreamed of becoming a composer, but dreams became luxuries when illness entered his home. He sold his piano, left the school, took every job he could find, and eventually became a janitor at Ardenvale Industries. The work was honest, the health insurance helped, and the schedule allowed him to take care of Nessa, but every time he passed the company auditorium and saw the black grand piano beneath the stage lights, a small part of him remembered the man he used to be. The blind boy was named Orrin Vale. He was 9 years old and the only child of Seraphine Vale, the founder and chief executive officer of the company. Seraphine was known in business magazines as a fearless strategist who could enter a failing industry and transform it within a year. She was admired, feared, and rarely seen without a group of assistants carrying tablets and folders behind her. Employees lowered their voices whenever she entered a room. Investors trusted her judgment. Rivals studied her decisions. Yet none of them knew how helpless she felt whenever she stood outside her son's bedroom and heard him crying quietly because he believed he was a burden. Orrin had lost his sight in an accident when he was 5. He had been in the back seat of a car driven by his father on a rainy afternoon when another vehicle crossed the median. Orrin survived, but damage to his optic nerves left him permanently blind. His father did not. From that day forward, Seraphine built her entire life around protecting her son from pain. She hired specialists, private tutors, mobility instructors, therapists, and caregivers. She purchased the latest assistive technology and turned an entire floor of her penthouse into a carefully controlled environment where Orrin could never fall or bump into anything sharp. She loved him fiercely, but her fear slowly became a wall around him. Orrin was brought to the company most weekdays because Seraphine could not bear leaving him far away. A private learning room had been created beside her executive suite, complete with braille books, tactile maps, and sound equipment. Yet the boy remained withdrawn. He answered questions politely but rarely laughed. He resisted music lessons because the instructor focused on perfect posture, strict timing, and endless exercises that made him feel like another project being managed. When visitors praised him for being brave, he felt even lonelier. He did not want to be brave. He wanted someone to treat him like an ordinary child who could make mistakes without everyone holding their breath. Tavian first met Orrin beside the service elevator one bright Monday morning. The boy had wandered away from his caregiver after hearing the low mechanical hum of the elevator cables. Tavian found him standing perfectly still, one hand against the wall and the other gripping a white cane. Instead of panicking or calling for security, Tavian simply introduced himself and explained where they were. He described the cold metal doors, the faint smell of lemon polish, and the vibration beneath the floor as the elevator moved between levels. Oren asked why Tavian did not speak to him in the slow, exaggerated voice most adults used. Tavian told him that blindness affected his eyes, not his intelligence. That simple answer changed something between them. After that morning, Oren began finding reasons to visit the lower floors. Sometimes he claimed he wanted to hear the fountains in the lobby. Other times he said the executive floor was too quiet. Tavian would let him listen as he rolled the cleaning cart across different surfaces, teaching him to identify marble, carpet, tile, and wood by sound. He showed Oren how an empty room created an echo and how a crowded hallway softened footsteps. He never grabbed the boy without asking. He never rushed to complete a task Oren could do himself. Most importantly, he never treated him like something fragile. Their friendship grew quietly over several weeks. Tavian learned that Oren loved thunderstorms because they made the entire world announce itself. Oren learned that Tavian packed the same peanut butter sandwiches every day because he was saving money for Nessa's school fees. Tavian told him about Nessa's obsession with astronomy and how she covered their apartment ceiling with glow-in-the-dark stars. Oren admitted that he could no longer remember his mother's face clearly and was afraid that one day he would forget his father's voice too. That confession stayed with Tavian. One late morning, while Tavian was cleaning the auditorium after a company presentation, Oren entered through the side door. Sunlight poured through the high windows, illuminating dust in the air and warming the empty rows of seats. Oren heard the piano bench scrape across the stage and asked what Tavian was doing. Tavian told him he was dusting the instrument, but Oren could hear hesitation in his voice. The boy asked whether he knew how to play. Tavian had avoided touching the piano for nearly 3 years. It reminded him too sharply of the life he had lost and the wife who used to sit in the front row whenever he performed. Still, there was something in Oren's question that made him lift the lid. He pressed one key, and the note echoed through the auditorium. Oren smiled immediately. Tavian sat down and played a simple melody, one he had written for Nessa when she was a baby. It began with gentle notes that rose like morning light and then settled into a warm, steady rhythm. Oren walked toward the sound, guided by his cane. When he reached the piano, he placed his fingertips against the wooden side and felt the vibration passing through it. Tavian stopped, but Oren asked him to continue. For the first time since they had met, the boy's guarded expression disappeared completely. From that day onward, the auditorium became their secret classroom. They met during Tavian's lunch break, usually when the executive teams were in meetings and the hallways were quiet. Tavian did not teach Oren through printed music. He taught him through images created with sound. Low notes became thunder rolling across distant hills. High notes became birds moving between rooftops. Chords were described as colors Oren could feel rather than see. Tavian encouraged him to explore the keys, make mistakes, and laugh when his hands landed in the wrong place. He showed him how to locate groups of black keys and use them as landmarks. Slowly, Oren began playing short patterns, then full melodies. Seraphine noticed a change in her son but did not know its cause. Oren started waking earlier. He ate breakfast without being reminded. He asked questions about concert halls and how sound traveled through wood. He began tapping rhythms against the dining table and humming while walking through the office. When his tutor reported that Oren had become more confident navigating unfamiliar spaces, Seraphine felt relieved, but also uneasy. For years, she had supervised every detail of his life. Now something was happening beyond her control. The tension reached a breaking point on a clear Thursday afternoon when Oren's caregiver discovered that he had left the executive floor. Security was alerted. Assistants searched conference rooms and stairwells. Seraphine abandoned an important meeting and hurried through the building with terror tightening her chest. Every worst memory returned at once: rain striking a windshield, twisted metal, the hospital corridor, and the doctor explaining that her son would never see again. A security guard finally reported hearing piano music from the auditorium. Seraphine approached the room expecting danger, disobedience, or some careless employee who had taken advantage of her son's trust. The door stood slightly open. She reached for the handle, then froze. Inside, Tavian and Oren sat together at the piano. Afternoon sunlight filled the auditorium, falling across the stage in broad golden beams. Oren's hands rested on the keys while Tavian quietly counted the rhythm beside him. The boy played slowly at first, missing one note and stopping. Tavian did not correct him immediately. He encouraged him to breathe, listen to the silence, and find his place again. Oren tried once more. This time, the melody continued. Seraphine recognized it after only a few measures. It was a lullaby Oren's father had hummed before the accident. She had not heard it in 4 years. Oren had remembered the melody but never spoken about it, and Tavian had helped him rebuild it note by note from memory. Seraphine stood behind the door, unable to move. Her son's face was peaceful. He was not surrounded by equipment, specialists, or protective barriers. He was simply a child making music. Then Oren reached the final chord and laughed with a fullness Seraphine had almost forgotten. Tavian laughed too, telling him that the missed notes did not matter because he had found his way back. Those words broke something open inside her. Seraphine entered the auditorium. Tavian immediately stood, his expression changing from warmth to alarm. He knew he had used the company piano without permission and spent private time with the CEO's son. He tried to explain that nothing inappropriate had happened, but Seraphine barely heard him. Her attention remained fixed on Oren. Oren sensed her presence and became tense. He believed the lessons would end. He had grown accustomed to adults deciding what was safe for him without asking what made him feel alive. But Seraphine did not scold him. She sat beside him and placed his hand against her tear-wet cheek. For the first time, she admitted that her protection had become a prison. She had spent years trying to prevent another tragedy, but in doing so, she had prevented her son from taking chances, building confidence, and discovering joy. She told Oren that she had been afraid every hour of every day since the accident. Oren listened silently, then explained that he did not need a life without risk. He needed a life where someone believed he could recover when things went wrong. Tavian lowered his eyes because those words struck him as deeply as they struck Seraphine. He realized he had also been living inside a prison built from grief. He had told himself that music belonged to his past, that surviving was more responsible than dreaming, and that happiness was somehow a betrayal of the wife he had lost. Yet while teaching Oren, he had felt alive again. The piano had not erased his pain. It had given the pain somewhere to go. Seraphine asked Tavian why he had never mentioned that he was a musician. Tavian explained that he was not one anymore. She looked toward the piano and told him that she had just watched him restore a part of her son that expensive experts had failed to reach. A title on a uniform could not erase what he was capable of doing. The following week brought consequences Tavian never expected. He was called to Seraphine's office and prepared himself to be dismissed. Instead, she offered him a new position directing an arts and accessibility program funded by Arden Vale Industries. The initiative would provide music education for blind and visually impaired children throughout the city. Tavian would be trained, supported, and given freedom to design lessons based on sound, touch, memory, and emotional connection. Tavian hesitated. He worried that he lacked credentials and that people would think he had received the position because the CEO felt sorry for him. Seraphine responded that sympathy had nothing to do with it. She had built her company by recognizing overlooked ability, and she had nearly overlooked his. Nessa was the first person Tavian told. She threw her arms around him in their small kitchen while daylight streamed through the window. She had never heard her father perform on a real piano and had only seen old photographs of him sitting at one. When Tavian brought her to the auditorium, Oren was already waiting. Nessa introduced herself by placing a small plastic star in his hand and describing the constellation it represented. By the end of the afternoon, the three of them were seated at the piano, creating a clumsy, joyful song that had no proper ending. The accessibility program opened 6 months later in a renovated community center. Its classrooms contained braille music materials, textured floor guides, sound-treated walls, and instruments children could explore freely. Tavian hired teachers who believed that disability did not erase creativity. Seraphine attended the opening without reporters or photographers. She stood near the back while Oren performed the lullaby he had rebuilt from memory. He missed one note, then he smiled, found his place, and continued. The audience rose when he finished, but Oren cared less about the applause than the quiet voice beside him. Tavian told him he had played with courage. Seraphine watched them and understood that courage was not the absence of fear. It was allowing love to become larger than fear. Over time, the relationship between Seraphine and Tavian grew beyond employer and employee, but neither rushed it. Their lives had already been shaped by loss, responsibility, and the need to protect their children. They began with shared lunches, school events, and long conversations after music sessions. Nessa helped Oren learn the solar system through textured models, while Oren taught her to listen carefully enough to recognize people by their footsteps. The children formed a bond that made the adults feel less alone. Tavian never stopped respecting the work he had once done. Whenever someone praised his transformation from janitor to program director, he reminded them that there was no shame in cleaning floors. The janitor's uniform had fed his daughter, preserved his dignity, and placed him in the exact hallway where a lonely boy needed him. What changed his life was not escaping humble work. It was allowing the hidden part of himself to be seen again. Seraphine also changed. She reduced her endless office hours and stopped treating motherhood like another crisis to manage. She allowed Oren to stumble, make decisions, and sometimes fail. She still worried, but she learned not to turn worry into control. On bright mornings, she would stand outside the community center and listen as dozens of children made music inside. Some played beautifully. Others struck random keys and laughed. Every sound reminded her that a meaningful life was not built by avoiding every painful note. It was built by continuing the song. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Ecoverse. Your support helps stories about compassion, healing, and second chances reach people who may need them today. And before the story ends, please comment the words "kindness sees what others overlook" to honor every person whose talent, pain, or goodness has remained hidden behind a uniform, a disability, or a difficult past. Years later, a photograph hung in the entrance of the music center. It showed Oren at the grand piano, Nessa standing beside him, Seraphine watching from the first row, and Tavian seated close enough to guide but far enough to let the boy lead. Beneath the photograph was a simple sentence chosen by Oren himself: "The darkest room can still be filled with music," and every morning, when sunlight entered through the high windows and the first piano note echoed down the hallway, Tavian remembered the day he believed he was only a janitor, Oren believed he was only a blind child, and Seraphine believed fear was the same thing as love. None of them had known that behind one half-closed door, their broken lives were quietly learning how to become a family. The story can also be adapted into a more suspenseful, slower-paced voiceover version while keeping the same plot and length.